Welcome in. It's another edition of the On the Mic podcast. I'm your host, Mike Pendleton, and it's literally been years since I talked to this guy in an interview. We talk sometimes often. He is the absolute best in the game of ESPN and with UFC 252 Fight Week. We talk about his co-host. We talk about all things MMA with this man. Truly honored to call him a friend, the one and only Ariel Helwani. Sir, how are you?
Mike, good to be back, my man. It's a pleasure to talk to you again. I didn't realize it had been years, so long overdue.
Yeah. I think last time we talked was right before 201. So
Oh my gosh.
It's been quite some time. We've had crossover fights, mega fights, but none bigger than this. But first, I want to start off by asking you, what has it been like adjusting to this pandemic in the business that you are in, and being in broadcasting and now doing shows from home?
It hasn't been all that difficult. I kind of feel like I started my career this way. In fact, I'm sitting at the same table that I actually did start my career doing interviews. When I started back in 2006, 2007, I would reach out to fighters via MySpace and do audio interviews with them. We didn't really have video capabilities back then. And it was pretty much the same setup. Now, fast forward 14 years later, I'm working for ESPN and I'm doing the same thing. So I kind of feel like I've been built for this. This is how I started. I'm comfortable like this. Obviously, you would love to be in a big fancy studio. Obviously, you'd love to be on the road at the big fights and the arenas with all the atmosphere and the fans and the buzz and the energy. But, I don't really feel like the work has suffered. It doesn't look as nice. It probably doesn't sound as nice, but for the most part, I think what I've learned is the fans just, as long as it's entertaining and engaging content, they're happy with it. And I've really tried. I haven't taken any time off during this period. I've really tried to give people something else to think about, a bit of an escape. I've tried to cover the sport as best as possible and not focus too much on the negatives. Just give people something, to be happy and excited about. So for the most part, I'm pretty happy with how it's gone.
Do you feel like your conversations with the fighters have changed at all? I think when you've kind of set in this pandemic and gyms might be closing, obviously heard what Chris Weidman had to say, this week, but I feel that, and maybe it's just the way I talk to fighters, but I feel like I'm getting more of a vibe of, don't take our sport for granted. Don't take what we do for granted. And even though the sport is still young and developing through the eyes of fans, I feel like the conversations have changed with fighters. I don't know if you feel the same way.
I felt that way at the beginning, like during the 2-month period where there were no fights. Now I almost feel like, we're both living in completely different universes because I feel like the fighters, they're traveling, they're at the gym, they're doing their own thing. Life has pretty much resumed the way it was pre-pandemic for them, and I'm still at home, and life is very, very different for me. So I don't know, I feel fighters are just a different breed. They're not bothered by these things, but I definitely feel like it has affected me, and I will agree with you. At the beginning it was definitely strange, but like now, you talk to these guys and yeah, like fight week is different. And I can't believe that, Daniel Cormier is going to fight Stipe Miocic in front of nobody. That's just weird. And the stuff that they have to go through with quarantining and all that, that's all very weird. But at the end of the day, when you talk to them, you almost have to remind yourself that we're living in this time because I feel like they often forget.
Yeah, no, especially when their life resumes, it almost like you said, they go back to normal. So it makes total sense there. What did you make of Dana White's decision to be back first? He said they would come back first compared to all professional sports. Fight Island was a hit. They've gone to Vegas. They've gone to Jacksonville. For me, I know, and I've said this a few times since, doing the podcast throughout this pandemic, is that I've had family, my uncle, who's never watched fights. He's a golf guy. He's a football guy. He started watching fights with me. Now it's a weekend occurrence that he picked up a new hobby. What was it like for you when you saw the UFC get out and lead the charge for professional sports?
Well, I felt like when they tried to do it in mid-April, the event at Tachi Palace, I felt like they were a little bit too aggressive. I felt like it was too soon, and ultimately the event couldn't go on. It just felt like it felt a little bit needless, senseless. It didn't feel like it had to happen that soon. The UFC isn't used to taking long periods of time off, but at the end of the day, like that was a month, for them, and it wasn't that big of a deal. By the time May rolled around, I felt a little bit better about it. And talking to people who were in Jacksonville, and then talking to people who are in Las Vegas, and of course, people who are in Abu Dhabi, what I'll say is I feel like they got better each and every time, and even back to Vegas now, like they've become stricter, they've become smarter about how to do things, and you have to give them a lot of credit. I know Dana likes to say that, the media was out to get him, and, like, I don't believe in any of that. I think you're starting to see that, by the way, in college football as well, where people are like blaming the media for certain conferences not playing. And I think that that's hogwash. I mean, our job is to talk about these things, and often it's very good stuff to talk about, and sometimes it's not so good stuff to talk about. But you can't just gloss over the times that we are living in, and the fact that every other sports league essentially on the planet was shut down at that point. So it raised questions as to how they're going to do it and why they're able to do it and all this stuff. But I think, look, the proof is in the pudding at this point. They've been doing it since May. They haven't had too many positive tests. You don't want to gloss over any, but everyone who did test positive, to the best of our knowledge, has recovered. So it hasn't been, anything catastrophic, which it could have been. It could have been an eternal black eye on the sport if things went wrong. And to your point, and I've experienced this as well, I've met a lot of people who I know, who are family members, who are friends, who could not care less 5 months ago about MMA, who now ask me for betting tips and talk to me about DC and talk to me about Stipe and Khabib and Justin Gaethje coming up and all this stuff. And it's like, wow, I never expected to be talking about MMA to you. So I definitely think that they have gained some new fans. It'll be interesting once sports resume in full force. I know, NBA is back for the last 2 weeks, and baseball and football hopefully is going to come back. It'll be interesting if those fans stick around. But for now, I think there's no denying the fact that they have gained a bunch of new fans, and that's a credit to them.
Yeah, no, it's been absolutely fun for me, being at home, having to watch these fights. And, I'll get into no crowd and the noises and the smaller cages, bigger cages in a second. But obviously, you can see right behind you, Montreal Expos. You just mentioned the NBA is back, MLB is back. And I don't think Dana and the UFC ever came out and said, we have a bubble, but we see in the NBA, no positive test, no positive test. NHL, no positive test. Baseball, totally different story. You mentioned football. Do you think Dana really ever thought like, oh, we needed to have a bubble, or the UFC thought we needed to have a bubble? Or do you just like the way they've handled it? The daily testing, and then you're off the card if you test positive.
Yeah, I think it would be almost impossible for them to have a bubble, just because every week is a whole new set of fighters, right? So yeah, you can't just like house 400 fighters and have them fight every 3-4 months. So I think this was the best case scenario. Actually, I think Top Rank did a really good job. Top Rank created their own bubble in Las Vegas, and they had really strict rules. The UFC was moving around a little bit. And of course, Top Rank waited for Vegas to open up to do their thing. So, for the most part, I think that the UFC has done well. I'll say that I think at some points it feels like there's a little bit of there's a few discrepancies. Like, at the beginning we were told if one of your cornermen tests positive, you're off the card as well. But now we see scenarios where cornermen test positive, but, guys remain on the card. Most notably, Jorge Masvidal, Mike Brown tested positive, and he remained on the card. So it's interesting that the rules are changing a little bit. But everyone that I've talked to, from coaches, managers, fighters, they've all said that they're really happy. They feel safe. They feel like the UFC is doing a great job. And like I said, no one has gotten seriously ill. So that's really important as well. And it's very important for the fighters that these fights go on, because obviously they don't get paid if they don't fight. And I think a lot of them are very thankful. And I think fighters in other organizations were starting to get a little antsy, like, hey, when are we coming back? And now we've seen Bellator come back successfully twice, and they have another event next week, and they're going to pretty much go every second week. I think that their fight sphere, as they're calling it, looks really nice. I think they did a really great job with that. So I'm curious to see how that progresses. So overall, it's a great time for combat sports. We just found out yesterday that Teofimo Lopez and Vasily Lomachenko are going to fight in October. So that's great. I'm happy that these promoters aren't saving and that's a boxing match, by the way. I'm happy that these promoters aren't saving these big fights for when the fans return, because I think that was the feeling at the beginning of this. And I just think that, like, I mean, we don't know when the fans are going to return, right? So, like, just give the people the fights that they want. And I hope that means that we get Conor McGregor back, because I think it's crazy that he's on the sidelines throughout all of this.
You wrote a great piece on what is happening to Conor McGregor in January. If you would have ever told me, the 2020 season isn't a thing, and come August we're going to wonder if he's ever fighting again. I'll ask you about Conor in a second, but you mentioned the big fights and in boxing and in MMA. I mean, you're the guy. You can tell me if it's on. I know the reports are Israel Adesanya, Paulo Costa at 253. Obviously, Khabib and Justin Gaethje 254. This weekend is Stipe in DC. These are all incredible fights. Some would argue what you just said, they should wait until fans can come back. What does it say to the sport? Not for the UFC or for Dana White or anybody particular, but what does it say for the sport that we are still, everyone, fans, media, everyone is still getting to see these big fights that we just mentioned?
Yeah, no, I'm happy that they're not waiting. Definitely it sucks. I mean, like, DC and Stipe this fight was supposed to be at the new Chase Center in San Francisco, the home of the Golden State Warriors. That would have been so cool. Brand new arena in the Bay Area. That would have been great. So these fights should be in packed arenas. And, I have said that I don't feel like the sport has missed a step because of the fact that there are no fans. I appreciate the sport just as much. I enjoy it. I think it's been interesting to watch the fights, but I certainly miss the fans. I mean, don't get me wrong. If they said today all fans could come back, everyone's healthy, there's a vaccine, whatever, I would be thrilled. I think any sport is better with fans, right? Packed arena, the energy, the buzz, all that stuff. So that being said, I'm happy that they're not waiting. I'm happy that they're able to pull these fights off, because there was a question at the beginning of all of this, whether or not they'll be able to even do that, and not just pull off the fights, but, can the fighters train properly? Can they be around other people? I mean, there's so many questions at the beginning of all of this. And again, for the most part, they've been able to do it. And look, sports are very, very important. I'm not one who believes like we must do everything so that sports should go on. Like, obviously, health and safety and education, all that stuff, way more important than sports. But let's be honest, sports are an escape valve for people, and they put us in a good mood, and they give us something to look forward to. I feel like I'm in a better mood since the NBA came back. Like, oh, there's a big game tonight. This is great. I miss this, right? I miss being a fan. I love MMA and I watch it and I enjoy it and I look forward to it. But there's a part of me that's like, this is my job, right? I have to do it. Like, it's just sometimes fun to watch a baseball game, a basketball game, and especially during a depressing time like what we've been through, we miss that stuff, right? There's only so many shows you can watch or whatever the case. So sports are very important, I think, to the psyche and to our moods and to just our overall well-being. And so I'm happy that they're able to figure out. I think baseball has been a bit of a mess, although maybe they're starting to turn the corner and figuring things out, or at least taking things seriously. But NBA, NHL has been phenomenal. I think football will probably be a little bit more like baseball early on. I'm not a big college football fan. I actually don't watch it at all, but I'm really sad of what's happening because I think that it's really important for people, and I want to see it. I want to see them come back. So in any event, all to say, it's great for combat sports that they've been able to figure this out, and now we're starting to see other boxing promoters slowly but surely come back, and MMA promotions, the KSWs of the world and the Cage Warriors of the world. This is all very good for everyone. So we should be happy about that.
Yeah, no, well, maybe I need to take a page out of your book because, I mean, obviously I grew up loving basketball, something you and I were big Knicks fans. Baseball, football, I used to watch it all. And during the pandemic, I've kind of just shut down and I didn't really binge watch anything except Kingdom when it came out in July. So it's like I've just been stuck on combat sports with baseball, basketball, and hockey coming back. I haven't watched anything.
Really? You're missing out.
I don't know. I watched 10 seconds of the Raptors game last night, the final 10 seconds. And that I was like, okay. And I just wanted to get back to watching other stuff. I put on CFFC. Like, I just feel like the sport came back. It grabbed my attention. It made me focus a little bit more on what I'm hoping, kind of like you said, that it's my full-time job one day. So I just thought maybe if I just commit more to the sport and stop worrying about everything else, I could stay focused a little bit. So everyone's different. But let's talk about UFC 252. Obviously, I mean, you've done so much during this pandemic. We had Helwani boxing. I didn't get a shirt. I don't know. Are they
Come
still
on.
for sale?
I think so. Yes.
All right, I got to get a shirt. There's a plug for you, Helwani boxing
Thank
shirts. You
you.
got to get those. But you do DC and Helwani, you do Ariel and the Bad Guy. You have your regular interviews that you do all on the ESPN platforms. You do so many things, but obviously DC and Helwani every Monday. I mean, you are tied with this guy. This is your guy. This is Daniel
Yeah.
Cormier. And you know, for me, I love seeing someone like you get to work with a guy like DC who has thrived in this broadcasting role that I don't know if people thought about 5 years ago. And now he's facing, you know, the biggest challenge of his career. What do you make of UFC 252?
Oh my gosh, I have so many emotions. First of all, it's a very special thing whenever the heavyweight title is being defended. It's a special thing, right? Because it doesn't happen very often. Like we were getting them once a year, so that alone feels special, right? Then you add the fact that it's Stipe defending his title, the most decorated heavyweight champion of all time, most title defenses. That's a big deal. Then you add the fact that it's a trilogy fight. They're 1-1. DC wins the first one via knockout. Stipe wins the second one via knockout. So now we're getting the third one. That's a big deal. And then you add the fact that it's DC's retirement fight. And how rare is it? You follow sports. You know, you sometimes know that a guy is at the end of the road. There are whispers, there's rumors, all this stuff, but it's never definitive like this. Very rarely is it definitive, right? Like what's the most famous one? Jordan and the Jazz, right? The last shot.
Yep.
People kind of knew, you know, there were hints, there were rumors, oh, they're going to break up with the team, but he never came out and said, I'm done, right? Here, DC is telling us, I'm done, and he's fighting for the belt, which is very rare. Like the UFC doesn't usually do this sort of thing. If they know that you're done, they're not going to put you in a title fight because then you can win the belt and then the belt is vacated, right? So it's just everything about it is so rare. And then, of course, you know, my relationship with DC. And by the way, I have so much respect and admiration for Stipe. He's a great guy, an absolute gentleman. You know, works as a firefighter. Won my first trivia challenge last year in Chicago. I mean, it's just there's just a lot of emotion going into this one. It's happening in the smaller cage. It's a big deal. It's for DC's legacy. Stipe doesn't want to be a part of this fairy tale story for Daniel Cormier. Like there's just so much there. And just, you know, strip all that away on paper. It's a fascinating fight, right? Like, can DC get him back down to the ground? Will he stand with him again? Will he make that mistake? Will Stipe be able to start quicker this time as opposed to how it went in the second fight? Will he go back to the body like he did? You know, like has Daniel made the adjustments? Amazing theater. I can't wait. I like the main card. You know, Sugar Sean O'Malley is very fun against Chito Vera. Awesome. Jairzinho against JDS. That should be very fun. Merab has been great as well, going up against John Dodson. So, I mean, yeah, these are the, you know, like the fight nights are great, but, you know, there's always a little extra with the pay-per-views. And to me, this one, it's my most anticipated fight of the summer, obviously because I get to do the show with DC, obviously because of my relationship. And I feel a special kind of connection to this particular fight because, you know, we started doing the show at the beginning of the pandemic and he was just starting to get back in shape. And I feel like we've been able to check in with him every single week and see the progression. And that's been fascinating for me. And I think it's been fascinating for the viewers / listeners as well. And now it comes to fruition. You kind of forget, you know, in April, May, oh, this is Daniel Cormier, you know, one of the greatest fighters of all time. Like he just kind of became a guy, like a co-host. I'm like, oh yeah, that guy's fighting for the heavyweight title on Saturday. So that's pretty funny as well. So yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah, no, and I'll say this, you know, I think, you know, everyone during this pandemic has also realized mental health is a real thing. And I'll say one of my highlights of the pandemic is the back and forth of you and DC when he signed the contract and he sends out the photo and the back and forth you guys had. Like, that's been one of my highlights, just to see that chemistry that you guys have. And just the way you're like, really? We just did a show and you didn't,
Yeah.
you don't want to tell me? Like, I can only imagine, you know, what that's like for you. But I'm going to flip the script here on this main event. And I get it. And I love the DC storyline and the final fight. And, you know, two questions here. But first on Stipe, is he getting enough credit, attention? You know, it's not like this per se, but it somewhat reminds me of Amanda Nunes, Ronda Rousey. I'm not putting DC fully in there, but he's getting a lot of the attention. They're playing up the trilogy. The production is playing up the trilogy storyline, but I think a lot of stories are focused on DC and not Stipe has the most heavyweight title defenses of all time. You know, we don't get enough of Stipe Miocic heading into this. Am I wrong on that?
Well, I'll say this. I mean, obviously, it feels like we get a lot of DC because I think he does the show with me and that gets attention. And because he's just kind of, omnipresent with the broadcast and whatnot. Stipe deserves all the credit in the world. But if I'm being honest, I mean, let's just call it like we see it. Stipe's really bad at doing media. Like, he's just not good. I mean, I can hardly understand the guy sometimes. He's like mumbling. And I've told him this, like, yo, but you need to slow down. We have to understand you. And I've had conversations with his manager. Um, you need to get us emotionally invested in you. You need to get the people to care about you. It's not just always about the fights, right? It's not just about the 15, 25 minutes. He doesn't like to do interviews. He doesn't like to let people in. And DC is the complete opposite of that, right? Like, he likes to do interviews. He likes to let people in. He likes to show you his family. And so I think people get attached to him. And so, I do think the UFC has done a good enough job building up Stipe, and they brought him to Cleveland and all this stuff. But I mean, he doesn't give them a lot to work with. I mean, like, even the countdown show, it's like 90% Daniel, and I know why. It's because he doesn't give them a lot of quotes, and then he pops up and he's like, he gives you nothing, And he's an amazing fighter. But so I don't want this to come across as me criticizing him as a fighter or a person. But if we're talking about strictly from a promotion standpoint, DC's doing the heavy lifting here, right? And that's just the way it is. They can show all the highlights, they could do all that stuff, but like, if someone doesn't want to engage and kind of think about Stipe, that sometimes frustrates me, is that he has like this aloof attitude towards it all. Like, you ask him a question, it bothers him. Like the stuff with Dana, right? Like, they did not have a good relationship, so much so that when he won the belt, I think it was when he defended the belt against Francis, Dana was about to put it around his waist. He takes the belt away from him and he gives it to his coach. I mean, gosh, who does that, right? And then you ask him about it, and he's like, oh, we're okay. I'm like, no, I know you're not okay. I know there's, so like, just talk about it, right? So I think that comes into play as well. People sometimes will say, like, oh, this guy's getting a lot of love. No, but I think, most famous example, Conor against Aldo. Conor does all the interviews. Conor does all the media. Everyone wants to talk to Conor. He speaks English, Aldo doesn't. So it feels like it's, weighted in his favor. But if there's one guy who's, putting himself out there and doing all the heavy lifting, then it's always going to feel that way. And so I think for the most part, this has been told the right way, and this has been done as best as possible. They're doing a press conference Thursday night. So I think that, that's something they didn't do for Masvidal Usman or Gaethje against Ferguson, or the Amanda Nunes fight. So, I think that they're giving this the right kind of love, especially during these circumstances, which obviously are a little different.
Now, from UFC 214 to UFC 252, I would have never guessed we are where we are, obviously with the pandemic as well. 214 being when DC fought Jon Jones, and obviously we had the test after that, and Jon won that fight. But how did DC, and this is one thing that I kind of wish, in a selfish way, to tell the true story of Daniel Cormier, because I think you would agree, you can't tell the story of DC without talking about Jon Jones. But it seems like the UFC and Daniel himself have gone on to write a whole new book about Daniel Cormier. Maybe it's Daniel Cormier, the heavyweight. And, we just look at DC coming into this in a totally different light, where it's not all about Jon Jones. It's not all about, do you want to have that trilogy with Jon, or what do you think of Jon? And obviously we're not hearing from Jon because he's not fighting right now. But how did, in your mind, in your opinion, how did DC kind of just forget about that whole Jon Jones chapter and start to rewrite a whole different book in his career?
Well, I think he changed weight classes, and once he won that heavyweight title, he no longer was attached to Jon Jones, and I think that was healthy for him. Look, he lost to him twice. And it's like, what do you want him to do? Just harp on that forever? I think it's healthy that he's saying, I don't need to stick around for the third fight. I'm good. I think that's why he was so happy when he won the heavyweight title 2 years ago, because it had nothing to do with Jon Jones. So I think this is fine. Jon was the better man. He beat him twice. First time, clean. Second time, obviously, PDs, you can argue. Some people think the PDs don't matter. Some people do. Like, those are the rules. So DC gets the belt back, and obviously that was a very disappointing turn of events. But at this point, I feel like they're kind of on two different paths, driving in two different lanes, and that's okay. He doesn't have to chase that fight forever. And I think that most people around him feel like if he wins this fight, there's no point. Jon kind of brings out the worst in him, and is Jon going to move up to heavyweight and all this? Like, you can win the heavyweight title in your final fight. What's better than that? Sure. Would it be great to win the heavyweight title and then beat your rival in the final fight? Great. But then like you're always chasing the next thing. And then there's the next guy. And oh, you got to beat Francis and you got to beat this. Like, all right. So there'll be 3 blemishes on his record. Very rarely does anyone retire undefeated, and that's okay. I think just changing the weight class got him out of Jon's shadow. And let's not forget, he started off as a heavyweight. The only reason why he went down to 205 to begin with was because he didn't want to fight his friend, Cain Velasquez. So to me, he was always a more natural heavyweight. He had trouble making light heavyweight. He made it. Every time, obviously, the Buffalo one was a little bit close.
Yeah.
But I think it was good for him to move because then he could get that Jon Jones story out of his mind and just focus on other things.
Do you believe in your heart 100% this is it for Daniel Cormier? You know him very well.
Yeah. If you would have asked me a few months ago, I would have said no. If he loses, I think 100% this is it. I think if he wins, 95%. And why I leave the 5% open, I think that if he wins, they might go to him and offer him that Jon Jones fight, or at least try to, present it to him. And I think the competitor in him will contemplate it and it will give him pause. He'll think about it. Ultimately, though, I think he will say, I'm good. So that's why I leave the 5% open, because Dana White himself has always said, like, there's 3 fights left for him. He talked about the Stipe and then the Jon Jones fight. So this was prior to the second fight, of course. I think that there's no doubt about it. If he loses, he'll retire. No doubt about it. But if he wins, there's a small chance that he'll contemplate. But ultimately, I think he'll decide, I'm good.
Well, you being a media professional and being around the sport for so long, knowing the ins and outs and everything from a broadcasting side as well, I'm just curious if you can kind of speak on from your seat how Daniel Cormier has grown in this side of the world, in the broadcasting world. Obviously, we've seen him on commentary during pay-per-view nights and other fight nights. He obviously has a show with you. And while he's a full-time fighter and a coach and father and husband, I think he's really taken this, very seriously. I never expected DC to take over the Joe Rogan role in UFC 4, but it happened. So as a broadcaster, from a professional broadcaster, how has DC grown?
Oh man, it's incredible. But I told him many years ago that I thought that, he could go down the path of Michael Strahan, that if he just sticks in combat sports, if he's in combat sports in the next 5-10 years and something went wrong, because I think that he has that charisma, people really like him, and he could do a lot of other things. He's not just a combat sports guy. So I always felt, I knew that he was very good at breaking down fights. He was very personable. People liked listening to him, being around him, etc. And so for now, this is great. I mean, the guy has got 48 jobs at this point, doing the UFC broadcasts and the stuff with me and the video games and God knows what else he's doing. So that's amazing for him. I mean, I wish all fighters had this many options upon retiring. And I think, by the way, this makes retirement a little easier because he's excited about all these things. If you have nothing else, you're going to stick around a little too long. So I think that really helps him too. But I don't want to be like the guy who said, I told you so or whatever, but I've talked to him about this for many, many years, that, he should get an agent and he should be looking elsewhere and he should be doing other things. Not saying he should ever leave MMA because it's his bread and butter and he loves it. So, look at Rogan, he still sticks around. He comes up every pay-per-view and he has his other stuff, which he's killing it with. So I think that DC, I mean, the sky is really the limit for this guy. And it's amazing to see a guy who has been through so much, so many ups and downs, so many, heartbreaking moments here at the end of his fighting and athletic career, 41 years old, having all these good things happen to him, having all these things come together. He's about to have another child, all this stuff. That's great. That, it doesn't always end up that way. So I'm very happy for him and he deserves it. And he's very talented. And so, if we're talking in a few years that DC is still doing all this stuff, I'll be like, man, I was kind of wrong. Because this was all a given for me. I knew he would do all this stuff, the broadcast, all that. But I really think he can end up on Good Morning America or the Today Show. I think he's that good, or any kind of show like that, or hosting or being some kind of presenter, whatever. So I really think that he has that talent in him. Not a lot of athletes possess that. And so I'm really curious to see where he goes. I mean, even little things like, and I know they've talked to him about it in the past, like, what was it, 4 years ago, NBC reached out to him to do color commentary for the Olympics, for wrestling, right? Like, he could do that stuff. And how great would he be at that? Like, how amazing would it be to have Daniel Cormier calling Olympics? So I think the sky's the limit for him, no doubt.
Yeah. I would love to see him in that Michael Strahan role. I think you hit the nail on the head there. I'll ask you this, going and just a few more here for you, Ariel. Really appreciate your time. How do you see Saturday night playing out?
Well, I don't make predictions.
I know you don't.
But I think DC will try to employ the same game plan that he had in the first round. I think he learned his lesson. And ultimately, I think that, he doesn't care how this fight plays out as long as he wins, right? If people say it's boring, first of all, he doesn't have to worry about the fans booing because they're not there. So, I thought what Askren said to him on Monday was perfect. Like, don't forget, you're one of the best wrestlers on the planet, with an amazing resume. Just do that, and obviously, it's not like Stipe is just going to stand there and he's going to take him down at will. But we saw in the first fight that he could do that, and he's better than him on the ground. Now, if they stand, DC was actually, doing pretty well in the standing, in the striking before, third, fourth. So let's not forget that. But then, of course, we all saw what happened. So I think if he is smart, he'll use the size of the cage and his wrestling to his advantage. Now, for Stipe, keep the fight standing. Obviously, it's not that hard. I mean, people also forget in the first fight, before he got knocked out, Stipe was winning that fight. And I thought he looked really good. So they both had moments where they should feel confident looking back and be like, oh, I'm better than this guy. And so that's what I'm really curious at. And they've seen like essentially the full deck at this point. So now I'm curious to see who makes the adjustments, who looks better, who does this and that. For some reason, I'll say it. For some reason, I don't feel like a finish is coming. And I know that's crazy because there've been a finish in the first two fights. I think it will be a tough fight. I think it will go the distance, and I think it will be entertaining.
Yeah, I'll take it. I know you don't do predictions. I'll take it. I gotta ask real quick, and then I just have a couple on a guy we mentioned earlier. Ariel, you do so much, and Helwani boxing provided such a light for a lot of people early on in the pandemic. And I'm not blowing smoke. I'm just telling you the truth. Social media tells the story for me. How do you maintain, or how have you maintained, like, just keep going? I'll admit, and I've admitted, in the past, in the last few episodes, I did take time off, and I did have, as many people do, whether it's media or not, peaks and valleys during a pandemic, and not working and then trying to find work again and all of that. How did you just keep going? Because I do say this, that, someone like yourself who continues to move, it helps the people who are trying to follow in your footsteps, whether it be in MMA or in media themselves. How did you just keep going?
I appreciate it. Look, I have moments too. At the beginning of this, I was very down, not so much about the job or whatever, but, family, my kids, school, my parents. I mean, it's very scary stuff that we were going through and are still going through. So there was definitely a moment. I remember I was like sitting right in back of my chair here, and I was like, man, this is horrible. There was a point where I was like looking at Twitter all the time and the news, like the real news, not MMA news. And it was just so depressing. And I had to tell myself to stop. I really just had to tell myself to shut it off. And once I did that, I started to feel a little bit better. And I also started to realize that there are a lot of other people who are feeling like me right now. And I have the power to give, whether it's a small group of people, large, whatever you want to say, like I have the power to give some group of people an escape to think about something else. And even, I'm a fan, I'm a consumer of media. All my favorite podcasts, all my favorite shows, all we're talking about the pandemic. So I don't know if you notice it. I mean, the first couple, yeah, you had to, but I've really tried not to focus on that, right? Yeah. Because I don't feel you could get it from other places. I have a role, and I'm not trying to ignore anything, but I really take a lot of pride in giving people an escape. And it's the best feeling when someone sends me a message saying like, oh, I listened to you on the way to this or that. I was hurt, I was sick, and I listened to you and you made me laugh, or you made me think about something else. Like, there is no greater compliment that anyone can ever give me than that. So I just felt like I needed to keep on going. And, try to be a leader and try to do the best that I can to give people something else to think about. And like I said, I don't need the fancy studio. I don't need the bells and whistles. I could do this on my own. There's a great amount of people behind the scenes, don't get me wrong, who like get the stuff to everyone. But in terms of like coming up with the content, I feel like I could do it on my own. So, and I've had to do it on my own for a very long time. So I'm not afraid of that. And I really take a lot of pride in being that light for people. So my wife would probably say that I should have taken a break, but my thing was like, where are we going to go? What are we going to do? I can't do a staycation because if I'm home, I'm going to like work or want to call people or text people or interview people. So that kind of sucks. And there are definitely moments where you feel a little tired and burnt out, but I really enjoy the job. I get to talk to fighters and talk about fighting for a living. Like what do I have to complain about? Right. And I'm very, very thankful that I have a job. I'm very thankful that I work for an incredible company and I have a platform. So, I mean, I'm the last person who should be complaining. I'm very, very lucky. So I want to use that luck and use that gift that has been given to me and help other people. And if it's helping a fan think about something else, great. If it's helping, a young journalist have inspiration to keep on going, it's fine. But at the end of the day, it's okay to take a break. It's okay to we should all take breaks. What I do isn't exactly the right thing in that regard. We should all take breaks. We should all take some time for ourselves, especially now. We should all, check in with ourselves. We should all, turn off our brains and all that stuff is very, very important. I feel very, very strongly about all of that. It's just, in my particular position, because I do media and because I'm, covering sports, which are usually fun and, the thing we look forward to get away from our daily lives, I felt like, what, maybe I should dial it up a little bit more just to give people a little more during these tough times.
Yeah, well, you've given me a lot. I can speak from where I sit. You've given me and the MMA world a lot, and I'm truly grateful for it. But one thing, obviously you can't give us is delivering fighters into the octagon yourself. So I got to ask, like, what is going on with Conor McGregor, and will he ever fight again, in your opinion?
Oh yeah. He'll fight again. It's just unfortunate, as you said, he had the season planned out and everyone scoffed at that, when he announced it, because everyone was like, oh yeah, he's not going to fight 3 times. He's going to get in trouble, blah, 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 blah. And, here he is, he wins his first fight. He's healthy. He's out of trouble. He seems to be in good spirits and the guy can't get a fight. And it's in large part due to the fact that they can't have fans. They make so much money off his fights. But, like I said, I think they need to get over that. He draws so much on pay-per-view as well. And there's a lot of money to be made off a Conor McGregor fight. So to sit him in his prime, to not engage with him, to not talk to him, to not negotiate with him, to just be like, oh yeah, he retired. Come on. We all know he didn't retire. He's done this before. Like it feels like an insult to everyone. And quite frankly, I feel like it's an insult to him. And I know a lot of people will be like, "Oh, you're siding with Conor." I'm like, "Yeah, I am siding with Conor. The guy did nothing wrong. Like, what's his greatest? What's his fault in all of this? That he didn't want to be a backup fighter to Khabib and Tony. Conor McGregor, backup fighter. Would Floyd Mayweather be a backup fighter? Would Canelo be a backup fighter? I mean, it's just a ludicrous thing, Like Conor, get it through your heads. Conor is not like everyone else. He's the biggest star in the history of the sport, and I think he should be treated as such. And so. Yeah, I think it's very unfortunate how this has played out. But make no mistake about it, he will fight at some point. I would be shocked if he never fights again. But I don't want to see him in a boxing match. I want to see him fight, Ferguson. I want to see him fight Poirier. I want to see him fight Nate. I want to see him fight Gaethje. I want to see, I want to see him fight, Masvidal. Like the idea that there are no fighters for him to fight, the idea that there's no dates, the idea that he's retired, like all this is hogwash. It's silly. And I wish that they would just, get on the phone, talk, and figure it out. Right now, they're not, because I think in their minds, they don't necessarily need him. In their minds, I would suggest you would need him every single day. But they've got a pay-per-view in August. They've got their pay-per-view booked in September, October. Now they just booked their November. We're almost up to December at this point. So will he fight again this year? No, there's a chance he won't. It's already August, right? Mid-August. But I think he'll fight again at some point. And I think we'll look back on 2020 as being a really 2019, 18, like those were wasted years for him, but those were self-inflicted, right? He messed up. He put himself in those positions. Like he had to suffer. This time around, it's not his fault. And is it the UFC's fault that the pandemic hit? No. But once they started putting on fights again, he should have been on that July 11th pay-per-view. He should have been on the September. He should have been like, pick a card, right?
Right.
He should have been on it. And I think we'll look back and say it was a mistake.
Do you feel like Conor McGregor, the person, turned a corner coming into this year? I mean, obviously he had a different tone in his voice pre-fight. The way he went about the media, in my opinion, it kind of had a different tone. But obviously, like you said, 2018 and 19, that was all self-inflicted. Why, things didn't go his way. But it's easy to do it once. And I think for me personally, just me, I got it. Okay, you reeled me in. But when you talk about season, I want to see Conor McGregor, the person, act this way leading into three fights in 2020, or handle yourself accordingly. Do you think he's turned a corner?
I mean, it's hard to say that like he's turned a corner forever, but I do think that he said all the right things and behaved the right way leading up to the Cerrone fight. Obviously, we haven't heard much, seen much from him. You see him on social media, but that's, all curated stuff. I think that he has grown. You saw him get engaged. He's very tight with his family, but who knows what's going on? I do think that 2020 from a growth standpoint and from a maturity standpoint has obviously been way better than 2019. 2019 was a disaster. And the previous years were pretty bad as well. So I think that, everything like post Mayweather wasn't very good. And last year was the worst. So, there obviously were, and rightfully so, questions about, could he, stay on the straight and narrow? Could he stay out of trouble? Could he, really focus on his career? Can he get back to his old self? And I think the Cerrone fight was like an emphatic yes. And I wanted to see him come back in March or April or May. And you know what I mean? And it's just a shame that he couldn't have done that. But like, if you just look at the news, like he's not in the news, right? Like there's no rumors about him. There's no nothing. So that's all very good. And that people are watching him like a hawk. So, it's just unfortunate to see a guy turn around like that. And I'm not saying he'll never get in trouble again, because who the heck knows, and not fight. Because could you imagine a year where he would have fought 3 times again? And he hadn't done that since 2016. And that was the UFC's best year ever. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very unfortunate. But I do think he'll fight again. I just don't know when.
Are fans going to tune into the stars or the sport's newest star in Sean O'Malley, or is it, because I know you don't shy away from an opinion, is it fair to say he's been good? Sean O'Malley, Sugar Sean, has been good. He's been great even, but we haven't seen the levels of competition yet from him. Eddie Wineland being the biggest name so far, and obviously he has Chito Vera this weekend. But are you all in on the Sugar Show and he's the sport's next star, or do you want to wait and see tougher competition first?
No, I'm all in. I think he's shown us enough. Now, does he beat the bigger names, the tougher competition? That remains to be seen. But like, you can't take away what he's done. Like, those are incredible finishes, incredible wins. And I hate when people see a guy who gets a lot of buzz and like, oh, let's see him fight, a top 10 guy. Like, the guy's 1-0, 2-0 in the UFC. I like the slow build for the most part. I know I advocated for Khamzat to get the fast track, but if you're asking for the big names, then okay, go for it. Go get the big names. But like, Sean has taken a slow approach. Now, after this one, if he wins, I think you need to give him some bigger names, because he's talking about Cody and, Jan and all this stuff. So thus far, he's been incredible. He's been one of the biggest stories of the year, because remember, he was off for 2 years. I love his showmanship. I love his demeanor, his persona, the hair, the robe, everything. And then most importantly, I love the fighting. I mean, like, how could you not? The guy is must-see TV. He's tall, he's lanky, he showboats, he knocks people out. Like, what more do you want, right? And he's got an incredible look. There's some bad blood between him and Chito. Awesome. I think Chito's amazing. 6-1 in his last 7. I think he should be 7-0. I think he won his last fight against Young Dog. So this is a really good fight, a really good test. I like that they put in the co-main event slot. Like, get those guys all the attention in the world. This is how you build stars. So I love everything about Sean. I love everything about Chito. I love everything about this fight. And if Sean wins, then yeah, like, should he fight for the belt? No. But now we're talking top 8 guy next. Something like that. It reminds me of the Conor Brandao fight, and then that got him to Poirier. That's what this fight to me represents, the fight that gets him to the next big fight if he wins.
Well, I can't say thank you enough. You're always gracious with your time. Hopefully we don't go another 40 pay-per-views before we talk again. But Ariel Helwani, let's see. Helwani Boxing Apparel, get it online. DC and Helwani, or just your show on Mondays on the ESPN MMA YouTube. And then you have Ariel and the Bad Guy on ESPN Plus. Am I missing anything?
No, that's it.
And the Helwani Show Pod on
Helwani Show Pod. Yes.
Yeah. So please, subscribe and listen to everything that Ariel does. Again, if I would have said 2 years when I started covering the sport, in 2 years I'm talking to who I consider the Adam Schefter of MMA, it's like I didn't think that was going to happen, and here we are. And now, like I said, I consider you a friend, and you do amazing work. And during this pandemic, you've helped me and countless others push along. So it was great to chat with you. I can't wait for this weekend. No better person to talk to during a DC fight week than yourself. So Ariel, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. I promise it won't be 4 years between the next one and this one. And I want to wish you the best. Keep up the great work. Keep on pushing. And great things will come your way as well. So always great to talk to you. Great questions, great interview. I appreciate it, my man. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Ariel.